Master your money, free your future. Welcome to Budget for Life. My name's Jeremy. I'm not a professional YouTuber. I am a financial advisor, but this video is not financial advice. In this video, I am going to break down for you guys 4 ways to approximate the revenue that GameStop's PowerPacks business is doing. We all want to know, right? How much money is this company making, particularly if it's being treated under equity accounting standards, meaning the revenue is not aggregated within GameStop's reported revenue numbers. So, how can we figure it out? 4 ways I'm going to dive into it. Sorry, here's revenue. 4 ways I'm going to dive into it. Before I do, just want to say thanks to those who have joined the channel as fans and friends and appreciate extra perks. And thank you for the commenters, subscribers, the engagement. I appreciate it. So, the first way, which is perhaps the most granular, perhaps the least accurate because we have the least amount of data in an aggregate sense to verify by, is based on the publicly reported PowerPacks polls. So, for example, here I have, the Pokemon packs odds, which GameStop communicates, right, under each of its types of packs, the odds that you get any one of these pulls. Well, hypothetically, statistically, right, every chase card for every type of pack has a 0.1% chance of hitting, or in other words, a 1 in 1,000 chance of hitting. So if we can verify that a chase card is pulled, then statistically speaking, that one card purchase represents 1,000 pack purchases in the aggregate, right? Smoothed out over time, you would expect that GameStop is not lying about their odds, but that their odds are actually accurate. If anything, right, they only share this out to the zero point 0.1 decimal, and that is relevant because sometimes these odds add up to 100.1, or in this case, the Pokemon Gold odds add up to 99.9, right? So some of these odds are slightly better than reported, and sometimes it's 100.1%, meaning somewhere in there there's a second decimal that's slightly worse. But let's assume that the packs are all the full 0.1%. What I've done is I have scoured GameStop's PowerPacks Twitter account, right? Anytime that they say that a card is pulled, right? I have gone to Reddit, scrolled every single post I can find dating back from 6 months ago plus for any PowerPacks pulls, and I've gone to Twitter or X and looked for any pulls I can, particularly for Diamond and Lunar packs, to give us an idea of what type of revenue is PowerPacks doing. And I've broken this down from every type of pack, right from Pokemon, football, baseball, and basketball, because they all have slightly different odds. And here's what I've found. In Q3, the Pokemon packs did approximately 6 million in revenue, or I shouldn't say they did approximately 6 million in revenue. Really, I should say surely they did at least 6 million in revenue. Why do I say that? Because it is statistically incredibly unlikely that every chase card has been posted on the internet that I was able to aggregate in the past 5 hours, which is about how long I've been working on this. That the odds that we have all chase card pulls accounted for within these 3, 6, 7, 10, 29 chase pulls is very low. I mean, it's very very slim chance that this is all the chase cards that were pulled. If we could know just all the chase cards, then we would have a really good idea of how much money PowerPacks has made just from this number here, right? Just taking the odds of 1 in 1,000 on the chase. I've included this revenue from the other odds as a way to kind of buffer for, compensate for the fact that there's no way we're even close to getting all of the chase cards, especially when you think about the starter and silver gold. When you think about what is GameStop reporting, is it likely that they post a chase pull on the higher value packs? It is more likely that those would be posted than the silver, golds, and starters. And from a numbers perspective, the higher the value of the pack, the more revenue that's represented. Because again, you're taking how much does one pack cost, and for each one pull, that affects the total revenue by 1,000 times that one pack. So a diamond pull, for example, if we change this to instead of three of them, let's say I found a fourth one, well, that just added $1 million to the estimated total revenue for the quarter. So if you wanted to be ultra conservative and say all of and the starters would be 25K, right? Would be added to the total revenue for one chase card. If you wanted to be ultra conservative, you could say that all of these lower odds are already represented within the chase pulls that I was able to find, and that Pokemon Power Packs did at least 5.2 million in Q3. I don't know how you could argue meaningfully over time that the Power Packs did any less than 5.2. My guess is that it's much higher than 5.9. Maybe not much higher, but certainly higher than 5.9, unless you think that in 5 hours, one person scrolling a few different pages and being very, like no duplicates represented here within my count, and very high bar as far as can I clearly see how much you paid for it? Is it very clear that you're a real person, etc. Right? Vetting out through my human eyes anything that looks suspicious or looks like it might not be a genuine pull. You get to about 6 million in Pokemon. By the way, Q4 off to a pretty strong start thanks to Lunar. Now, is it likely again that some of these Lunars are already represented? Is it likely that these three chase lunar pulls are actually fully representing all of the other lunars that were purchased? If so, and at the highest end, I think that's the most likely, right? At the highest end, you could say maybe all these diamonds are there as extra fluff. And so, great, you take out all those other diamond pulls, 5.9 goes down to 5.5. In this case, in Q4, which is not over yet, you pull out all the other lunar pulls, and 12.5 goes to 11.1. But again, we don't even have a single diamond chase, for example, that I have found yet. Now, football, Q3, another 1.8 million. And again, I would say this is at least. So you take in a 1.8 and you add in, let's call this the conservative 5.2, but probably it's more. Let's just round up for simplicity's sake. 8 million in revenue from Power Packs in Q3 from a bottoms up statistical analysis perspective on any card pulls that I can find or could find in the past 5 hours. Also, you have baseball and basketball officially representing in Q4. I'm going to keep this up for a little bit, just kind of keeping these tabs open and refreshing anytime that I get around to it, at least every week or so, kind of catching up from what I've missed. And hopefully, this becomes a meaningful data point. Not that this total revenue number will equal the digital power packs total revenue, But digital power packs total revenue is probably some multiple of this, right? Some fraction of cards that are bought are posted, which means this revenue is some fraction of what the total revenue actually is. And that fraction number is something like $8 million dollars in Q3 and on pace to be, you know, maybe it's already close to 15 for Q4, a doubling quarter over quarter, for example. So that's one way. And the estimate that you get for Q3, I just communicated, right? Something like 8 million. From this, you can't necessarily say how much higher than 8 million would it be for Q3. I don't know how to give you a top end range of what percent of pulls are likely posted on the internet, right? By GameStop or others. I think you could say, I mean, that's basically where you would come up with the top end range is coming up with a number for that. And if 8 million is the, or if you want to pull out all of the other cards and you only want to go with the chase number, right? 5.2 plus 1.75, you're at 7 million of just chase revenue, just chase card revenue. What percent of chase card pulls do you think was posted on the internet during Q3? Do you think it's 50%? I mean, that'd be pretty. If you think there's a lot of hype, a lot of people and work and money going into this, then you'd like that's the higher the number you would say. If I think on the low end, it's probably only 25%, which means that 7 million would represent maybe 28 million in total revenue on the high. I mean, it could be less than 25%, but I think the first quarter, you know, and if you want to take 25% and still use 8 million as the total number, then you end up with 32, right? Something like around 30 million as a estimate for total revenue based on a bottoms up perspective and then what percent of those card pulls represent the total number of card pulls. Somewhere around 30 million in sales for Q3. Next way you can think about it is GameStop's investment, the cash outflow into their PSA investment. So they contributed 17.7 million into PowerPacks. It was not an equity contribution, it was an operational contribution. We know this because if it was an equity contribution, right, if this is GameStop increasing their stake in PowerPacks or paying for some of their PowerPacks ownership, for example, then we would have seen other non-current assets go up by that 17.7 million, and it did not. It went up by 1.1 million, which is likely 0% related to that cash outflow and more so related to the 3 million in other income, which also, if it's PowerPacks related, would have to increase GameStop's non-current asset value tied to PowerPacks. Are you tracking? 17.7 million sent to PowerPacks probably at the very beginning of the quarter. I don't know why they would do it at the end of the quarter. It's not to their advantage to do that, especially if they are trying to be discreet. So likely this is money used by PowerPacks to fund inventory purchases, right? So then the question is, did PSA match this, right? Is there even more money on the other side of the coin? Probably not. It's common in partnerships, especially when one side of the partnership has the operational edge or is the, some people would say, the more important part of the partnership. It's likely for the other side of the partnership to kind of make up the difference with cash. So likely PSA, I mean, PSA is the big dog in the graded card industry. Power packs, if it's not supported by PSA's vault, by PSA's brand, it is hard to imagine how PowerPacks would take off, right? GameStop needs PSA more than PSA needs GameStop. Obviously, GameStop has advantages and abilities that are beneficial to PSA. I think PSA is interested in the partnership, obviously, because the partnership exists. I'm just saying, I don't think PSA put another 17.7 million from their end on top of GameStop 17.7. I think that 17.7 is only coming from GameStop, but used to purchase inventory at the beginning of Q3. Now, Ryan Cohen's interview on October 20th or so, he said they're selling everything that they can get their hands on as far as inventory is concerned. We also know that a portion and really a majority of purchasers, at least if they behave the same way that Courtyard purchasers do, they sell the card back to GameStop, right? That 100% of purchasers are not taking the card and vaulting it or shipping it to themselves. Most of them either immediately or soon after are selling the card back to PowerPacks. So, if they had 17.7 million worth in cards, which by the way, the cards are appreciating in value, and if they are able to sell everything they have and some portion is getting sold back to GameStop, right? And if PowerPacks is then using their income to reinvest in inventory, right, to purchase more inventory throughout the quarter, then the way I factor this in is surely they sold at least 17.7 million worth, but probably, right, they are able to purchase some cards at a discount through bulk purchasing, right? To go to someone and say, I will buy this amount of your cards at your card show for 10% off. If you want to make a couple, $100,000 right now, GameStop has power through their capital, right? Power packs can leverage that to obtain cards at a decent rate. All that to say, how much is 17.7 million going to generate in sales? Probably on the jump at least 20. And if they can sell at least 50% of that another time over the span of a quarter, then I'd say again, you're probably somewhere around 30 million for Q3 revenue. The main factor is how much more, like, did PSA add more cash to the cash pile? And how fast is GameStop able to resell a card after it's already sold another time, right? How many times are cards cycling through? Those become big factors. I'd say the floor is at least 20 million based on GameStop's cash invested into Power Packs. The ceiling is maybe more like 45 million, right? Somewhere from 20 to 45 when you think about GameStop's cash investment. On this side, I talked about the ceiling, somewhere around that 32, or if you'd say only 20%, I'm not willing to go any lower than that. But if only 20% of card pulls were posted during Q3, you have 8 million divided by zero point 0.2. That's upwards of 40 million on the high end from a bottoms up perspective. On the low end, I think 50% of posts, 50% of purchases represented by posts. So you would end up with something like 15 or 16 million in revenue for Power Packs, up to about 40 million from the card counting perspective. From the cash investment perspective, you're looking at something like 20 million up to about 45 million. Method number 3 is Courtyard.io's sales. So I have referenced this in videos before. This tracking data for Courtyard sales Here's how I would extrapolate that to a PowerPacks estimate. So their Courtyard's numbers here, sorry, I'm blocking it all up. We see their average sales from April to August were 63, or really from May to August, were 63.8 million, with 51,000 unique buyers and an average dollar per sale of $127. So, what happened in the months since then, which just so happened to be the months of Power Packs ramping? Well, their average sales down 73%. Their average buy and why are their total sales down by 73%? Well, there's two main factors. One is the quantity of their buyers, 30%, 31% drop in the number of buyers, and a 40% drop in the average sale price. So, in other words, this sales decline is 43% attributable to fewer people buying stuff, 57% attributable to people buying cheaper packs. So, how do we extrapolate this to GameStop? How much of those trends are related to GameStop? How much are not? Well, one assumption is I think, and I've said this before, that this is not Courtyard's publication. This is Crypto Slam. What are they doing? They're just aggregating the sales purchases listed on Courtyard's site. Courtyard's site includes their own buybacks from customers as transactions. So I don't care about that, right? So I'm saying these sales numbers that Courtyard's doing, I'm saying only 60% of that is customer revenue. I'm saying the other 40% is actually Courtyard is the one purchasing. Courtyard is the sale, buying back from the customer. So already you're taking a 60% shaving. I think this decline in buyers, I'm saying, is 100% unique to Courtyard. I don't see a 30% decline in consumer interest in graded cards from September to December. I think that this exodus of buyers is directly related to Power Packs coming online. Now, this average dollar per sale coming down, how much of that is because of Power Packs and unique to Courtyard, right? How much of that is representative? How much of this trend is shared by Power Packs? How much of this is unique to Courtyard? I'm saying 30% is unique, 70% is shared. In other words, I'm saying some of this decline is not just related to consumer interest changes. I'm saying some of it's related to Courtyard investing in marketing through DraftKings throughout the year, which doesn't directly affect their sale price, but they are going after the more and more fringe customer to try to expand their buyer pool. And the more that they are doing that, the less value per customer they're getting. And you see that, right? This huge drop off in their buyers. And all of a sudden they're getting some buyers back, right? But not necessarily as valuable of buyers as they had before. Combined, however, some trends I think are shared by GameStop's Power Packs. For example, Christmas season obviously brings noobs into the fold that just want to buy a pack for fun or for a relative, whatever. And I think affordability and inflation is another big factor. So basically, when I think about these numbers going from 64 million to now averaging 17 million, and over the past 3 months averaging even less than that, closer to 12, how much one for one am I saying, oh, just move that revenue over to GameStop? It's obviously GameStop doing all that money. Well, not so fast. So if you take this decline from their 64 average and you net out the impact of their buybacks. So you take 60% of the value out of it, and then you net out their unique, um, what should I say? When you factor in the fact that some of these declines are elements that PowerPacks also faces, right? Basically, 40% of this decline, of this number being lower than what it was, comes from factors shared by GameStop. You end up with 30 million in Q3 as my estimate for GameStop's Q3 based on Courtyard's numbers. Again, I shared this in one of my first videos estimating PowerPack's Q3 sales and ended up at a 30 million estimate. I got more granular with it here, but this is how I would think about PowerPacks as it relates to Courtyard's reported figures. What can we learn about that through what PowerPacks might be doing? I would consider this one more speculative, but it is another piece of information and it's not speculative in a random way. It is a absolutely a direct competitor that does almost exactly the same thing. It's almost the same product. So it's not um, a crazy extrapolation. So there's way number three to estimate PowerPack's Q3 sales. Way number four is through the income. So we know GameStop reported a $3 million other income in Q3. Under equity accounting, this is exactly where PowerPacks and any other equity investments, joint venture income would be reported. So on the high end, you could say that all $3 million of that $3 million net income is attributable to PowerPacks. On the low end, you could say only 1.1 million is attributable to PowerPacks. How do I get that figure? Because that is the bump in the other non-current asset value from 53.1 to 54.2. And we know that this non-current asset has been declining for years, right? From 65 down to 60, down to 50, right? So this climb that's happened in the most recent quarters, in my opinion, is clearly related to GameStop ramping power packs. So this $3 million, every dollar of this that's attributable to power packs has to increase the other non-current asset value. The reason I'm saying up to 3 million of this could be genuinely related to power packs, even though this asset value only went up by 1.1, is related to those historical declines, right? We know that GameStop is cutting costs and closing stores aggressively. So they haven't shifted any of that. So this $50 million base, right? Is it plausible to say that now that 50.5 is actually a $48 million base? But then when you net in the impact of power packs, you see a net increase of 1.1, right? There's declines happening in other parts of this, and there's increase happening in the power packs part of this other bucket. So it's at least 1.1. It's no more than 3. For sure, literally factually, GameStop's portion of power packs net income is no more than $3 million. So, what is GameStop's equity in PowerPacks? I am not willing to consider that it's any less than 40%, mainly because GameStop is the one that proposed this deal. GameStop came to Nat Turner with this opportunity. And why would GameStop come with a big ask and say, we want to give ourselves just 1/5 of the pie, I think that's crazy. I think they asked for at least 40%. Most likely it's 50%. Why do I think it's impossible or incredibly unlikely that GameStop owns more than 50% of PowerPacks LLC? Because of equity accounting. So when you have control, which is usually greater than 50% of the stock, greater than 50% of the investment, right? Then you have to include and integrate all of the joint venture numbers into your own numbers, right? So we wouldn't have this other income. We would just see, hidden within collectibles, power packs, numbers, etc. So it's not greater than 50%. It could be as low as 40%. That's GameStop's equity stake. Why does that matter? Because of the math, right? If GameStop makes $3 million dollars for their portion, but their portion is only 40% of the total pie, that means the total pie, right? Power Packs made $7.5 million dollars. If GameStop's portion is only 1.1, which I think is unlikely. I don't know what else would trigger this $3 million dollars other income. Q1, I think this other income was related to writing, moving Canada and France off of their current books and putting them into assets held for sale, non-current assets. Because they move from non-current, they become other income at that point. If they end up writing in, for example, a slight asset improvement, that, oh, the total land value is a little more than we estimated, right? Nothing changed in Q3 as far as France or Canada. Nothing at all. So why would they randomly during Q3, not even during the quarter that they dispose of France or the quarter that they dispose of Canada, right? No changes there. So where else is that other income coming from? In my opinion, it's definitely coming from Power Packs. All that to say, if only 1.1 is coming from Power Packs and 1.9 of that 3 is coming from somewhere else, then you end up with a $2.2 million Power Packs net income. So what is the margins that Power Packs would be getting on their Power Pack sales? Now, this is not that important of a factor yet because Power Packs could be reinvesting they could be basically expensing all their net income, reinvesting it into purchases that decrease their net income, right? Whether it's through capital, like equipment, right? Whatever it would need to be, maybe a purchase that then they can immediately depreciate some value of it, maybe a insurance policy for their growing card value, inventory, whatever it could be. Their GameStop's the Power Pack's income is not a reliable figure yet because GameStop could very well be manipulating that number. That said, if you're going to take this net income and assume that they're not manipulating it, this is what this exercise ends up being. So, what margin is PowerPacks getting on their sales? I think it's at least 10%. Now, this is like net margin. So, this is after all their cost of operation. So, this does factor in, right? That, well, GameStop takes another fee and they actually make 12.5%. And well, some cards might appreciate actually, and they actually get closer to 20%, like whatever it could be. But then you still have costs, right? Now, the costs aren't very high, and the costs aren't necessarily growing by the revenue, right? Most of the costs are probably fixed, which means as a percentage of revenue, the cost might be very low, meaning that the margins that they could get on their power packs, like the percent of PowerPack's margin that has to go to cover PowerPack's costs could be very low. Compare that, for example, to the digital sales, right? GameStop sells digital downloads, and they've told us that they recognize the net on the revenue, right? They don't recognize every single dollar of revenue, but they recognize the net on the revenue. But even still, the gross margin is 89%. So whatever GameStop gets on the software, right? Whatever Halo pays GameStop when GameStop sells a digital copy of Halo for 50 bucks, Halo might only pay GameStop $2. GameStop's not reporting that. They're just reporting the $2 as the revenue. But on GameStop's end, for every $2 that they make, there's 20 cents that they need to spend just from their website upkeep and whatever they attribute to that. But that's for a product that GameStop doesn't own. So, all that to say, the margins on the net income, like, what am I trying to say? If PowerPacks is clearing a 15% margin, is it quite plausible that only one or two or three or four more percent are going to all of the PowerPacks costs? And that actually a 10% margin or a 15% margin actually clears, 9 out of 10 of those dollars actually clear, right? That's kind of the idea. The lowest I'm willing to consider that they operate at is 20%. The highest margins I'm willing to consider they get are 20%. This would bake in a lot of appreciation on the cards themselves, which I think the higher the value of the card, the more possible that is to be a factor. And it assumes that they're able to buy cards for those kind of bulk buyer discounts, which I think is less likely on the high end cards, but quite likely on the mid tier cards, right? If you go to a person that owns a ton of $500 cards and you say, I'm willing to write you a check for 50K, that's huge. If you're going to someone that owns Shining Gyarados and you say, "Hey, I'm willing to buy this for 10% off of the value," I'm like, 10%, that's 3 grand. And by the way, I know what I have. I'm wanting to sell it for what I want to sell it for. But as soon as GameStop gets their hands on it, the odds that they can sell it for a premium are pretty high, especially on the rare cards. So whether it's through bulk discounts or card appreciation on the high-end cards, maybe PowerPacks is clearing a 20% margin. If they're clearing a 20% margin and they're making 2.2 million in income, that means that PowerPacks would be doing 11 million in revenue on the low end. If they're only operating at a 10% margin with a $7.5 million PowerPacks income, then you end up with a $75 million ceiling for PowerPacks. Is this still possible? And PowerPacks to not be material? Yes, it is possible. So GameStop did in sales 821 million in Q3, which means as long as PowerPacks together, right, not factoring in GameStop's percent of the pie, but the total pie, as long as it's less than 82 million, GameStop would not have to report the numbers. So 75 million is possible. What do I think is most likely? I think the 3 million is the most likely number. Let me just say most for net income. I think 50% is the most likely equity percentage, which would mean necessarily that PowerPacks made $6 million. Let me actually check. Hold on. This 7.5 million on GameStop's operating income. Okay, so this I think it's unlikely that PowerPacks could have made more than 4.1 million in net income because that would have been more than 10% of GameStop's operating income. It's operating income, right? 10% threshold, assets, revenue, or income from operations. Okay, so going back down here, again, this is the least meaningful of the four because this number is easily manipulated, but this number needs to be less than 4.2. So, what's the most likely way that you get there? I don't think it's through saying GameStop owns more than 50% because I think that would mean they have to report it included within their other numbers. So, really, it just means some portion of this other income is not related to GameStop or not related to PowerPacks. 1 million of it is something else, 2 million of it is PowerPacks, 50% as GameStop's equity, giving them a $4 million PowerPacks net income. If that net income, if we split the difference, is 15% too generous? Maybe so. Is is 10%, I mean 10% is what I've been operating off of um in all of my videos thus far. I think a $40 million revenue as kind of the, I guess you could say, revenue high end based on this. And if it's up to 15%, then you're at a $27 million revenue for Power Packs. If we call it a 12% for now, then again, just like all of the others, you're right in that $30 million range. Isn't that fascinating? Isn't that fascinating? Four completely unrelated measurables, all putting you at really conservatively like a 20 up to a 40, 45, most likely sitting somewhere in the middle around 30, whether you're evaluating GameStop's other income, whether you're evaluating Courtyard's sales, whether you are evaluating GameStop's cash investment into PowerPacks, or whether you are evaluating literally every post I can find on the internet. PowerPacks in Q3 doing something around 30 million, on pace to grow by how much we will see. If you learned something in this video, let me know in the comments. In a coming video soon, we'll talk about what does this mean as it relates to valuing Power Packs, right? What do we project and appreciate from here? But I've probably talked for long enough today. So let me know what you learned, or if you didn't learn anything, but hopefully you learned something. Leave a like, sub, appreciate all y'all. That's all I got for you today. I will see you in the next one.